little bit of a lag. Well, thanks for having us today. Like you mentioned, it's myself and Mike Seaman from the Salt Lake office, who's no stranger to burn scars and flash flooding with being an IMED over at the Salt Lake office. So yeah, we just really wanted to kind of promote the post-wildfire flash flood playbook. This is something that has been around for, well, we just released it a couple of years ago, and we're getting ready to re-release it to the field here shortly. We've got a lot of great content in it, and hopefully you all can find things that are beneficial to use as we get ready for this wildfire, burn, scar, flash flooding season in a couple of months here. So with that, I will pass it over to Mike.
All right, thanks, Megan. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the origins and where this effort came from. Prior to 2018, really it was a kind of a scatter shot effort across Western offices about how to deal with debris flow, post-wildfire debris flows, the impacts, IDSS, that kind of stuff. So in an effort between Western Region Headquarters and I believe it was led by Jennifer Stark and Tony Anderson and the group at Pueblo, we held the first ever post-wildfire hydrology workshop in Colorado Springs in September of 2018. And that basically brought hydrologists and meteorologists and burn scar experts from across the country into one location to kind of share information and get everybody more or less on the same page. So one of the things that came out of that effort was to basically try to document steps forward, like best practices, that kind of thing. It became apparent that there's just a wide range of knowledge and experience and expertise dealing with post-wildfire debris flows, ranging from offices in the Intermountain West like Salt Lake City, Grand Junction, and Pueblo, who deal with these on a fairly regular basis and had established local protocols, to offices in the Pacific Northwest, such as Portland, who really historically hadn't dealt with these kinds of threats, but with our evolving climate, that started to become a bigger and bigger issue across the Pacific Northwest. So that's basically where this effort came from. So led by Mike Houston from Pocatello, this group of forecasters from both Central and Western region, a cross-region collaboration effort, got together and put together this basically outline of all the information and steps that are out there for any office, ranging from experienced offices that are just looking to kind of get an idea of what the newest technology is out there and best practices, to spin up offices such as Portland that really hadn't dealt with this type of situation before. So we got the effort started there, and then the Central Region lead class was brought on to help complete the playbook, and that's where Megan and her group came in and really pulled everything together and turned this into a very functional tool for the field. So moving on to the next slide. Essentially, what this is a living document. And what we mean by that is Megan mentioned that we're going to be re-releasing this next month. And the idea here is that we basically go through this effort every year, collect feedback from the field as we go through the fire season, the post-wildfire debris flow season as the rains come in, and then basically review what the old document had, remove old outdated data, integrate new best practices, new case studies, and re-release this document every year. So that's where the field really comes in terms of giving us feedback, case studies, things that work, things that didn't work, newly developed best practices, and then we can integrate into this playbook and re-release every year. So it really is a living document, and it's designed to be the most updated information available. So in terms of team members, the team currently is made up of roughly 50% Central Region and 50% Western Region staff. So it's a really nice mix from Grand Junction. Well, starting at the top of Emily Thornton and from Flagstaff, Aaron Walter, and of course Megan Stackhouse from Grand Junction, Mike Charnock from Cheyenne, Mike Houston from Pocatello, myself in Salt Lake City, and then Tony Anderson in Cheyenne. We've had a number of past participants who were on the original team and gave a lot of really good feedback. And again, those even a Southern Region member there, Lauren Reynolds from El Paso. So just members from all across the agency. That's been really great for feedback and to basically build this tool. So moving on to the next slide. Again, input from the field is vital. case studies and best practices, IDSS tools, any kind of local training that's been developed. A lot of these are very much local events, and so I think each office kind of develops best practices that work for them, but then it's also important to share that amongst the region and the Weather Service as a whole. And some of these could even be best practices that expand beyond the debris flow threat into other arenas. So, just sharing information that's developed locally is always a good thing.
All right, thanks, Mike. So before I forget, Bruce actually did put a link in the chat to the playbook, just in case anyone hasn't viewed it before. So it's just, like Mike mentioned, a living Google document. So we'll be sending out the new link here shortly when we re-release it in a month, but just for everyone's reference, it is in the chat. So now we're going to be walking through the different sections in the playbook and just kind of highlighting what our favorite content is. There is quite a lot included in it, so we're just going to kind of point out what we like or what we think is really applicable to the field. So taking a look at the layout itself, so we have numerous sections to help offices and RFCs in whatever stage they are in, whether it be the pre-fire planning and preparedness, whether they're currently in the active fire preparations, post-fire readiness, and we also have a sample playbook application, and we have various appendices, which includes different acronyms and abbreviations mentioned throughout the playbook, as well as those case studies that Mike alluded to. So there's just a screenshot of the latest operational version of the playbook. And again, we're going to be re-releasing this playbook next month. So taking a look at the first section, the pre-fire planning and preparedness. So it's broken up into more subsections. So we have the community outreach and preparedness, which really just takes a look at making an effective WFO warning program. And this includes making contact with the local river forecast center, local emergency managers, media, state and federal point of contacts, and other stakeholders that would be involved in this kind of process. We also have example outreach presentations and one-pagers of post-fire risks. So again, the main thing with this is just getting the community prepared. We also reference what to do for if you want to have an IWT. We actually here at Grand Junction did have a post-wildfire themed IWT, so we use these documentation planning documents ourselves. And we also include different IDSS resources, including the specially designed Post-Wildfire Flash Flood Toolkit, which I'll show the different sections here shortly. And then we also have the WFO program implementation section. So this includes different training materials. We have different WDTD and CLC training modules that are helpful for fire operations. We have tips for coordinating with BAER teams and how to establish situational awareness. We also have a service backup document that has strategies for both primary and secondary backup offices. And we have a warning decision best practices section. So taking a look at the post-fire flash flood toolkit. So this is its first program with its own IDSS page and resources. So different sections for the post-wildfire flash flood IDSS toolkit include social media graphics. So this includes different graphics to share on social media relating to burn scar education, watch and warning graphics. And then something that's going to be re-released with this news playbook are these outdoor recreation safety graphics. So Erin Walter in Grand Junction, she did these awesome graphics. So including the different recreation things. So whether that be national forest land or it be a certain trailhead or campground, just for WFOs to really personalize whatever they are concerned about in a burn scar. So for example, we had the Grizzly Creek here in Grand Junction. So concerned about I-70, but then we're also concerned about the Grizzly Creek trailhead. So really just helping offices find ways to personalize it and get the message out for their office. Another section of the toolkit is the IDSS operational support section. So in here we include different briefing templates if you're going to have a briefing for your partners regarding a potential burn scar flooding event. And we also have tips for what to use for NWS chat, so things to send to your partners and things like that. Another section is the operational planning section, which details how to coordinate with the emergency management community and different DSS leading up to and during the event. We have checklists, and we also have an example burn scar incident support page. So just how to outline every single burn scar that you have based on year, and you can kind of sort it based on susceptibility. So main thing was this is that just giving, again, offices the power to copy these things and design them to be whatever is most applicable to their office. Another section is the IDSS Information and EM Resources section. So this involves advertising INWS, getting everything set up for the partners, educating the community on debris flows, having different one-pagers and other educational pamphlets to distribute to the community. And these are also available in bilingual as well. So there's some debris flow education. And then these are the different pamphlets that you can send out. And you can see there's the one that's available in Spanish. And then another section of the toolkit is video resources. So this is just kind of talking about the Spokane office. They did some great burn scar flash flooding videos. I think we've all seen the one with Troy Lindquist where he was dripping the water on the burn scar and showing that absolutely nothing got soaked in. So just linking those videos for the public and sharing it and help getting the message out. And then finally, we have websites. So these are numerous websites that are referenced in the toolkit to increase both partner and forecast office situational awareness during and after a wildfire. So we have the Cheyenne Safer page and other great resources that we can share and utilize ourselves.
Great. So one of the, when you're preparing like pre-wildfire, it's important to kind of, that's the point where the WFO, I think, wants to learn what resources are available to them. And so that's what I'm going to kind of talk about is some of the more intimidating parts of the playbook. And what I mean by intimidating is where do I go to get information on how much rainfall is going to take to result in a burn scar or a debris flow? Is this burn scar capable of producing a debris flow? Those types of things that for officers that are not as familiar with these situations can be probably a little bit intimidating. So some of the tools that are available in the playbook, BAER team assessments. What's a BAER team? A burn area emergency response team. They basically go out toward the latter stages of a fire, generally on Forest Service land, and they'll test the soils and assess the severity of the burn, basically ranking it as low, moderate, or high burn intensity. That combined with the steepness of the terrain, they will determine whether or not there's a debris flow risk from that fire. So that's kind of the boots on the ground approach, and that's really your best bet for getting information. So there's information in the playbook in terms of how to acquire that information, who to contact. You definitely want to get on those while the team is there, because once they disperse, they're just kind of gone. A lot of fires are not on Forest Service land and will not have a BAER team. The USGS has developed a debris flow model, taking into account terrain, estimated burn severity, and some other factors to determine how much rainfall would be needed to produce a debris flow on a certain burn scar. So that's that middle image there. That can be really helpful even for fires that do have BAER teams, just to kind of corroborate the information. And then tools even to integrate that information into AWIPS on a specific burn scar, so you know which actual drainages are impacted. Sometimes you can have heavy rain on an area of a burn that didn't burn very severely, and so there's really no debris flow threat there, or perhaps it's an area that's just not impactful. So those are some tools that are available. On the next slide, let's see. In terms of obtaining weather stations, sometimes, especially in the West or more rural areas, we have data sparse regions that just don't have a lot of weather information. In the Western US, we do have RAWS stations, which are generally used for fire weather. But we also have these portable RAWS, and basically just portable weather stations that you can put out on a burn scar in order to get real-time information about how much rainfall is occurring. So we have information in there about how do you obtain one of these weather stations. Western region has a cache of them. Here in the Salt Lake office, we have a grant with the state and the Department of Transportation, so we have a number of stations on hand. There's a number of different ways you can acquire a weather station and get it sited. So there's also information about placement strategies, where you'd want to place one of these weather stations on a burn scar to get the best information and the most reliable info. And then alerts, basically when we can set these stations to send out automated alerts when a specific amount of rain has fallen, and you can configure that to pop up a red banner in AWIPS. In this case, well, we asked the IT to just run a test for us, and 1.45 inches in 20 minutes would produce rainfall problems in just about any situation, but especially on a burn scar. But you can set them up for like a 1/4 inch in 15 minutes. And that way it alerts the forecaster in real time, even before that data may show up on the web, so they know exactly what's going on. So those are all really useful tools that have developed, and all that information is in the playbook. So moving on to the next slide. Some situational tools and alert systems. Fire perimeters are available in AWIPS and GR2, but sometimes so basically every fire perimeter in the country in a given year is contained in this file, and we might not necessarily be interested in like 90% of them. We're just interested in the fire perimeters that actually have a debris flow threat. So there's some techniques to trim that file down and just be able to display the burn scars of interest. There's tools out there like Chad Kaler has developed a tool that uses HER precipitation rates and burn scar information from the BAER teams or the USGS model to assess debris flow hazards in real time, or basically forecast debris flow hazards using the HER precipitation forecast. So that's actually a really interesting tool. There's ways to set up the permanent raw stations to transmit every 15 minutes. There's a request form, especially for data sparse areas, that can be really good, as well as information about FFMP and how to locally forest your flash flood guidance once you establish these thresholds. So just a plethora of information that otherwise would be, if you're new to this, it's like, wow, there's so much stuff out there. So the playbook basically brings that all together, and it is very large. There's a lot of information in there, but I think it can be really useful. So the next slide. There's also a document that Mike Sharnick has put together about warning decision best practices, largely focused on radar interrogation using either GR2 or especially in AWIPS. There's examples in there from dual pole outputs, just basically looking at some best practices using radar and then applying those to the warning decision making process. And also integrated in there are how to look at different burn scar, the areas on the burn scar that you're actually concerned about, as well as run out areas, is that flood comes off the burn scar into a drainage or into a populated area, and some examples of how to develop shape files to account for that. So just some really useful information there. Moving along. Some service backup strategies. Like I mentioned earlier, the debris flows are very localized and very unique to each situation and each office. So for instance, my office backs up Grand Junction. So with the Grizzly, I believe it was the Grizzly fire over along I-70, Grizzly Gulch fire. Anyways, we would be able to use this document to help us get information from Grand Junction about what they're concerned, what their thresholds are, the polygons that they tend to use when they get debris flows off that burn scar, things like that. So it's just, service backup is obviously complicated in and of itself, and then when you throw in flash flooding and debris flow threats, it can be pretty intense. So this document basically goes through some strategies to help minimize the problems of what can go wrong there and just try to streamline everything. So a really great resource there. Stepping ahead, in terms of when a fire is actually ongoing, so we talked about a lot of different tools, and those are things that you'd want to familiarize yourself before a wildfire strikes. I mean, it's just like severe weather season, all the spotter talks are in spring, all the educational stuff, the training, the preparedness is done before the event, so that when the event occurs, you're not scrambling and trying to figure out what the heck do I do with this or that. So that's what basically we just presented on, was some of the things that you want to be familiar with going into when an actual fire occurs. So when a fire is in progress, one of the biggest things is, the community is, for obvious reasons, solely focused on the fire itself, because that is the immediate threat. What often is not realized is that's just the beginning, especially if you're dealing with fires in steeper terrain. That debris flow threat begins immediately, and that can go on for a period of 2 to even 3 years. So, for obvious reasons, the community is focused on keeping that fire out of populated areas, keep it away from destroying infrastructure. But they're not really thinking about the heavy rainfall, the flash flood, and the debris flow threat that's likely to come over the next couple of years. So that's when basically, hopefully you've already established these relationships, and this is where we get out to community meetings during the event and remind people that, hey, you know, we need to start thinking about mitigation efforts in terms of flooding. That's also where you want to implement that WFO IDSS plan, some of the things that Megan talked about with the toolkit. You know, looking at some of the tools about how much rainfall is going to take. I mentioned that the BAER teams often don't show up until the latter portions of the fire. You may have, you'll have incident management teams on site handling the fire. Those, the larger teams will have an incident meteorologist and a fire behavior analyst. So getting a hold of those people on the fire in real time and getting an idea of, you know, what areas do we need to be concerned about before we can even get this assessment, and what areas are you concerned about since you're on the fire. So just things like that to try to get as much information as you can in real time before we can actually get those final assessments done. And then moving on to the post-fire operations, I think on the next slide. Yeah, just again, this is the time that you'd really be implementing all those things that we talked about, from community support, getting out into community meetings, the neighborhoods that may be impacted that are just at the bottom of these drainages where we're concerned about, making sure that the people there have an emergency plan in the case that we do end up issuing a flash flood warning. And sometimes things such as, you know, talking to these people and saying, hey, if you're seeing heavy rainfall up on the mountain, maybe just, you know, take the family out for ice cream just to be safe, you know, just not to cause any alarm with your kids or whatever. Little strategies like that to try to minimize the panic, but also keep people safe. And again, just the WFO readiness, this is where all those things that we talked about earlier just kind of come together. Because this is, once you get into the post-wildfire timeframe, that's where the threat really manifests itself. Once you start bringing in those, you know, heavier rainfalls, maybe they're monsoon thunderstorms toward the end of the fire season, maybe it's a strong Pacific cold front. It could be any number of things, but that's really, once the wildfire's out, that's where the debris flow threat really begins. So next slide.
I just want to throw in real quick, Mike. So again, with the WFO readiness, it really is just about empowering the whole office and making all the forecasters, the hydrologists or the hydrofocal point, the ITO, everyone involved in these kind of burn scar flooding operations just feel comfortable and prepared for these kind of events, because we all know how crippling they can be during operations. So yeah, just making sure the office is ready and everyone feels comfortable.
And yeah, and part of that preparedness and just making sure everybody's ready is taking all that information and getting it into one place. So one example of that would be developing web pages that have all the information from the areas that we're concerned about on the burn scar itself to contact information. So this is an example of a burn scar we have along the southern Wasatch Front here in northern Utah. It's called the Bald Mountain. There's actually two fires that merged into one. So Bald Mountain / Pold Creek. It was a very steep terrain on the southern end of the Wasatch Front there, a lot of high intensity burn area, a very concerning situation. So basically, we can plot on the map here, like these areas in red are the high intensity burn areas. So those are the areas we'd be most concerned about wildfire versus the green areas that maybe didn't see quite so much. And so then if we click on that, it'll actually pull up in a page that has all kinds of information from Google Earth info to who to contact and in what order in terms of the emergency management, local community leaders, what kind of warning language you'd want to use. These are likely set up in hazard services before the event, but just kind of what, given a certain amount of rainfall, what do we expect to happen? And so all that information is right there for the forecaster, and that's all put together in real time so that when we do start getting heavy rain in the area, we're not scrambling to try to pull this information together. It's already located in one place. So that's one thing that we encourage in the document is building some of these local web pages just to have all that information right there at your fingertips. And then finally, we also have a sample playbook application, and that's basically aimed for offices that are very inexperienced or just haven't really dealt with the debris flow threat at all. And this kind of takes you through some of the things that you need to be thinking about, such as your office speaking with one voice, focusing your operations on the potential debris flow, just making sure that all the forecasters, hydrologists, I would hope that hydrologists would be on board, are focused on the threats. And so when there is heavy rain in the area, you're basically situationally aware of the areas that you need to be concerned about in terms of a potential flash flood. So yeah, I'll pass it on to you, Megan.
Thanks, Mike. So the last sections that we're going to talk about are the appendices. So at the end of the playbook, after we have all this great information, we have our various acronyms and abbreviations. So again, like we have the BAER team, things like that, different things that WFOs, if they're not familiar with it, they can just reference that easily. Then we also have our case study presentations and research section. So with this, we talk about, we have our detailed case study from Oxnard. They had a pretty significant debris flow event from the Montecito fire back in January of 2018. So they have a lot of great information, including they have the story map that they made. They had information on evaluating the burn severity, USGS modeling, how they made their warning decisions, and their IDSS strategy and messaging. So they have even a little flow chart of their actions that they took ahead of the event. So really great detailed case study from Oxnard that's included in the playbook. We also have various presentations and research on post-fire flooding events. Most of these are from our Rocky Mountain WFOs. So we have Tony Anderson and Greg Hevenar from Pueblo. They did their burn scar flooding storm of the month presentation. Grand Junction, we've done several event reviews for the Grizzly Creek fire from this last year. And then we have something from Cheyenne, again, their wildfire safer page that we mentioned. So looking at the future of the playbook, our future initiatives and our plans. So our next playbook release is scheduled for April 4th. So next month, so we'll be sending that out and letting everyone know what changes were made to the playbook. And future playbook additions include continuing to expand on the post-wildfire warning operations. Like Mike alluded to, we already have that great starting point with the warning best practices, but just continuing to evolve this as we get more, as we experience more burn scar flooding. We're also going to continue to solicit additional research, case studies, and presentations from the field. We've mentioned this several times just because this playbook really would not be possible without getting that feedback from the field. So we really want to make sure we can encompass other regional post-fire and flooding concerns. So looking at on the plains for the grass fires or what happens down in southern regions. So really just continue to expand it and make sure that this playbook can be as useful as possible for everyone in the Weather Service. And we also want to continue to add more training modules and outreach materials. So again, the playbook is the plan going forward every year is to re-release the playbook each spring after we receive input from the field the previous fall. Again, just continue to incorporate the latest lessons learned and best practices. So if you're interested in submitting input to the playbook, sorry, there's a lot of animal gifs in all my presentations. So our team is always looking for input from the field. We really just want to continue to enhance our repository of case studies, best practices, any IDSS tools that you've implemented at your office, any sort of training that you've used at your office, and just any other kind of documentation, because again, it really would not be possible without the field. So we can all learn from each other. We steal from each other because we all have, why recreate the wheel? Everyone has all these best practices. So getting the information out and just sharing it with others is really going to be beneficial to other offices. I already know I'm going to start stealing that example of post-fire specific incident page that Mike showed for Salt Lake City, because that was awesome. So if you're interested in submitting, just contact any of us on the Playbook team. Myself or Mike Seaman would be great, just as a starting point since we're here, but all those other names that we mentioned, if you just send that information to any of us, we'll get it into the playbook. So that was all we had, unless Mike, did you have anything else to mention?
I don't. I think you covered it well.
Yeah, so again, we'll be re-releasing this in April, on April 4th. So be on the lookout for that in your emails, and thanks for having us.